Greetings, students, and welcome to this special edition of The Professor Travel Domestic Edition. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the website, the vlog, and the podcast that you come to in order to learn more about different travel destinations. This is where we come as a community to discuss more. Hopefully, this will inspire you to travel more and ultimately to enjoy life more. Now, you can reach us on a variety of different social media platforms, starting, of course, with my website, which is at theprofessortravel.com. You can also reach me on YouTube, Facebook, and now on TikTok at The Professor Travel. If you're an Instagrammer, you can find me there at the_professor_travel. If you're a Twitterer, you can find me there at the Professor TR1. And then if you're a blogger, you can find me there at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I am so happy to have two of our returning visiting professors with us, Amy and Bob McCormick. Say hi, guys.
Hey, aloha.
Aloha! How are you guys doing?
Good.
Awesome. The reason, of course, that we say aloha, which is both hello and goodbye, as I understand it, is because today's topic will be to discuss the beautiful island series of Hawaii, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. And or should I just refer to it as the state of Hawaii? I don't know. We'll have that conversation in just a second. But even Bob's dressed for the occasion. You got your shirt on. So now, before we get started, can you, again, for those of my students who haven't had an opportunity to see your previous videos, can you tell them a little bit about your educational credentials and maybe some places that you've traveled before?
I am Amy McCormick. I grew up in Orange County, California, and I've lived and also taught either as a substitute or full-time teacher in Guam, Alaska, and then I've been subbing in Hawaii for the past 6 years.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right, I'm Bob McCormick. I grew up in Lake Elsinore, California, and after that moved out to Guam in '91 and was working in tourism out there. Went there originally with the Coast Guard and then came back in the Coast Guard and have been bouncing around Hawaii, Guam, and Alaska for the last 16 years. And yeah.
So you guys have a very diverse triangle of area that you cover. So from the really, really cold to the really, really warm and beautiful. So great stuff. Well, as I was saying, today our topic is going to be on the state of Alaska. And let's start with a little bit of history. I understand you guys have lived there for a little while, so you probably know more about Hawaii than I do. So can we talk maybe about some of the older history, some things that you might know about?
Sure. So just going into the older history, it was discovered by the early Polynesians from the Marquesas Islands, somewhere around between 300 and 800 AD.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they got there from, like I said, down in the Marquesas Islands on sailing canoes. Lived in small communities as fishermen and farmers. And it was kind of small villages throughout the 8 islands there. And they were ruled by chieftains, and they kind of battled each other for territory through that time. First European contact was in 1778. Captain Cook stopped in there. And then he came back a year later and they had a big confrontation and they killed Captain Cook.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That I did not know. I mean, I've heard of Captain Cook and I was like, oh, okay, I know he was an explorer. I was like, I did not know that they killed him. So, okay, well, that was interesting.
Hawaii is where his exploring stopped.
Okay.
Then in 1791, between 1791 and 1810, King Kamehameha was he was one of the chieftains, and he conquered all the other territories around the island and united them into one kingdom. So that's when that happened. 1820 was first Christian missionaries, and shortly after that is when the whalers and traders started coming in.
Okay.
Unfortunately for the Hawaiian people, when the traders and whalers came in, they also brought in their diseases that the Hawaiians were not accustomed to, and that brought the population, which was around 300,000 people, and it brought it down to 70,000.
That's almost similar to what happened in Mexico when Cortez went to go visit Montezuma. They brought all
Yeah.
the smallpox blankets and stuff like that.
Yep.
Ugh.
1893, the American colonists, backed by the Navy, basically overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii.
Okay.
And they established the Republic of Hawaii. And 1894, the first president of the Republic of Hawaii was Sanford Dole from the Dole Pineapple Company.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did not know that.
And 1895, last Hawaiian ruler was deposed, imprisoned, and forced to abdicate, and basically was imprisoned in her house. And then, and Amy will talk about some of these a little bit. And then in 1900 is when it became a territory.
Okay. Do you know when it became a state?
Yeah, and Amy will actually
I'll
cover
talk
that.
about that.
Sure.
It wasn't until after, Pearl Harbor happened December 7th, 1941, and it was not a state yet. But at that time, I've had the privilege, I think every year that I lived in Hawaii, of hearing some of the survivors of Pearl Harbor talk. And it's really eerie. I mean, to hear them talk about, it happened on a Sunday morning, and some of them were in church, some of them were out playing basketball or at the beach, and just them describing like the planes flying over and them not knowing what is going on or what they need to do.
Yeah, there was no
And
warning. Or very little warning. I want to say there was like a media, if I understand correctly, there was like a very small like radar signature that came on board like all of a sudden.
And it just people were very confused, very frightened, and across the whole island, people were affected. I mean, obviously, right at Pearl Harbor, immediately they knew they were under attack. But around the island, I heard stories of people saying, we didn't know we knew something was going on, but we didn't understand what, because we saw the planes. And
do you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but do you know if it was just primarily Oahu that was affected, or were the other islands also affected?
Mostly Oahu, because they had the battleships and the planes and the airplanes.
Okay.
And the Japanese wanted to disable the armed
American
forces of the U.S. And so they purposely went into Pearl Harbor where the ships and the planes were, and attacked there.
Okay.
And there were over almost 30 planes were wiped out, and actually 300 planes and 30 ships.
Oh, wow.
Eight major battleships were totally destroyed or damaged. So that the day after that is when war was declared. And so at that point, Hawaii went into martial law and basically was ruled by the military. And there was a lot of tension because, I mean, I know, in the rest of the United States, there were internment camps for the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at that point in Japan, at least a quarter to a third of the population were Japanese descendants. And they knew they couldn't just put them all in camps or send them to California. And they were such an integral part of the economy. So they didn't do that there, but there was still some tension and suspicion with the Japanese people, but they didn't necessarily put them into camps the way that you hear about in other places of the United States. But then finally, when the war was over, that's when there was talk about statehood, but it didn't happen until 1959.
Okay.
And the people voted on it, and 94% of the Hawaiian people voted yes, let's become a state.
Okay.
So that happened in August 21st. So
beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that's it. I mean,
In
great.
terms of any modern
Uh,
history, anything since then, or has it been primarily the focus of the state since that point?
Statehood. I mean, some of the history more, there have been some big volcano eruptions, typhoons that have come through, but those are the major ones.
Major history points? That makes
Yeah.
sense. But
It
speaking,
is
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
visit. It's definitely interesting to go visit Pearl Harbor. It's very humbling. And they'll have video recordings of some of the survivors, and then you can actually take a boat out to um, some of the sites of um, of a memorial, and then also where the ship sunk, which is just, it's really eerie to go out there.
It's very eerie because they didn't choose to raise the ship. They didn't choose to
Right.
it's like there are bodies that have literally decomposed down there because they didn't want to
Yeah.
necessarily bring them up. But it's like
Yeah.
that's why it's a memorial, from what I understand. Again, I haven't been to the monument or the memorial at Pearl Harbor, but my parents had, and they
Right.
said it's a really awe-inspiring
It is.
thing to.
And even if you don't have time to actually take the boat out to the memorial, it's so worth it to just go to the they have a little museum out there that you can walk around, and it's totally free. So if you're just passing through, it's worth it to go in there, and they have some images and videos playing, and you can kind of walk around. If you have more time, then yeah, it's worth it to try to get out on a boat to go see the memorial.
That's one thing I would love to venture. It's like, how much time do you need when you're going to visit Hawaii
Yeah.
if you're going for a trip? Because I've had trips where I've had two trips there. I've had one
Uh-huh.
where it was just a 7-day trip and one where it was a 9-day cruise.
Okay.
And it seemed like the 7-day trip was enough to get me a good taste of Oahu, and
Yeah.
the 9-day trip was not really enough to cover all the islands
I
and
know.
do a lot of stuff there.
Right. And there's even around the island, there's a lot of really interesting historic. There's a military museum in Waikiki,
Mhm.
which to me initially that doesn't sound very interesting because I'm not super interested in military or army history, but it was so fascinating because it gives the history of Hawaiian military, and then it overlapping with the US military, and then all the way up to modern times. So I thought it was really, and then also the Japanese influence. That's at the military museum, of how they helped with translations and um, helped win the war in World War II.
Yeah,
Even
there was a lot. It was weird because there was a lot of suspicion about the Japanese that were in Hawaii, but a lot of them were very patriotic.
Yes, very
very patriotic, and they kind of had to overcome that U.S. suspicion of them when they themselves felt like they were Americans.
Yeah.
It was their home that had also been bombed, so
Yeah, exactly.
that makes
Right.
sense. I've never, or I should say, I've only spoken a couple words in Japanese. But Bob, you speak Japanese pretty well, correct? Or at least conversationally?
Moderately.
Okay, enough to conduct tours, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. All right, so let's move on to geography then. So just from the pictures, and for the people on the podcast who are listening to this, unfortunately, you need to come to the YouTube channel in order to see this, because there are spectacular photograph. It's a photographer's paradise in Hawaii. I mean, from the volcanoes to the waterfalls to the beautiful waters to the beautiful sunsets. I mean, it just seems so amazing. But again, there's no states that are located around. Guam is the closest territory, I think. And
Correct.
in terms of like, there are mountains, there are forests, there are lakes and rivers and all those kinds of things. There's a
Yeah.
variety of different things to choose from that are there.
Mhm.
Is there a lot of snow?
So up on the Big Island of Hawaii, which its formal name is Hawaii, but they call it the Big Island because the whole state's called Hawaii. It's a little confusing.
Okay.
But up on Mauna Kea, they do get snow up there where the observatory is.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's, by the way, one of the world's best observatories as well. It's I think I want to say there's like 3 that are universally renowned, and the one in Hawaii is actually supposed to be one of the best ones.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, because it's so high up and there's no light pollution from surrounding cities. So
very cool. All right. In terms of weather, though, there are some extreme weather events that occur there, starting, of course, with volcanoes, which are continuing to go on some cases. In fact, I want to say just last year or the year before, there was a huge thing about on the island of Hawaii that there was active lava flow that was like starting to cause traffic issues, as it were.
Oh yeah. It well, it definitely changed the landscape of the area. We were lucky to have gone within the year before the volcano erupted, and there we went swimming in some well-known tide pools and went along the coast and everything. And then once it started to erupt, they evacuated the people. And if you get a chance, it's definitely interesting to go there and talk to the rangers in the park. Even if it's not erupting and there's no lava flow, it's super interesting to walk out on the lava fields and just learn about how the islands were formed.
Sorry.
Oh, and but a year later, we went back to the same spot, sort of. It didn't exist anymore because the area, like a bay where we had gone snorkeling, was totally gone, and houses there's just a wall of
lava rock,
lava rock. Yeah, it's just so amazing, and it's sad for the people that live there, but just amazing to see that the geography changing so quickly.
Yeah, and I had to spend a lot of time down there at work with the Coast Guard because we were evaluating evacuation points, because basically the lava flow was cutting off the road system to the communities down there. And so we kind of had to evaluate where we were going to get people out of that refused to evacuate. And then also keep boats away from the lava flow where it was going into the water, because people were getting too close with the boats. And there was one tour boat that was hit by flying lava.
Oh, wow.
It shot out so far that it hit the canopy around the boat, and some people got injured and stuff. So we kind of had to keep them a little bit further back.
And that is the most dangerous thing on a ship, is fire. I mean, that can just, that can instantly sink you. No pun intended.
Yeah. And then another interesting, I guess it's a weather phenomenon. I don't know what you'd call it. Within a month after we first moved to Hawaii, I was having really terrible sinus problems. And I hadn't had that since I lived in Southern California. Like whenever the Santa Anas would blow, I would get really bad allergies and sinus problems. Well, I went to the doctor and said, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the molds or something, because maybe in Hawaii it's more humid. And he said, oh no, it's the VOG. And it's the volcanic smog.
Oh, really?
Yes. And it's definitely a problem for people that have
like breathing issues associated with that.
Respiratory issues, because the wind blows just right. It would blow from Big Island over to Oahu. And some days, like it would blow in and then the wind would die down. And you could just see the like red glow around the island of the VOG, like just this ash in the air. It smelled, and it, I'd be outside surfing or paddling and have like respiratory problems.
That is what it's like in Irvine right now here. Yeah. Like it's beautiful sunset, absolutely gorgeous, like red and orange. It's beautiful right now. But man, it smells like mosquito all the time now. It's crazy.
Yeah. But it's hard on your sinuses and your lungs. So.
And down off of Kona, which is the leeward side of the Big Island, when we were patrolling down there, sometimes the fog would get so bad that it would drop visibility. You could only see like a mile or two because it was so thick.
That is tough. And not that any of us are volcanologists here, but I was going to ask, are just being residents of the island, do they train you in terms of like how to like safety precautions around things like here in Southern California, we're trained extensively on how to avoid things like earthquakes or what to do
Um,
in an earthquake.
They, we had friends that lived over there. I think maybe the last eruption prompted them to move. And they lived in the lava flow zone. And I mean, we talked to them about, they got plenty of warning. The people that work, um, you know, measuring like what the volcano is doing,
Mhm.
they keep everybody updated. Like the local mayors and the government to make decisions on when they need to evacuate people.
Okay,
And
so they
it
do
was
hire
really
volcanologists to work with the people and the government.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
with civil defense
geographers, they definitely are in close contact with them all the time, letting them know what the activity is. And what was interesting is even before the lava started to flow, they above ground, they could see it or measure it flowing below the ground. They knew exactly where it was flowing deep under the ground and where it was likely to be heading, and they could sort of predict within the next few days there would be lava coming up under the ground within certain streets and towns and everything. So they give the people plenty of warning.
but that's really only on Big Island where there's an
Yeah.
active volcano. The rest of the islands were not affected by it.
Well, I know Oahu has Diamond Head, and that's a volcano, but is it dormant or
It's
what's
dormant.
It's
it is
yeah.
completely okay. All right. And then let's move from fire and lava now over to the other extreme, which would be water. So in terms of things like water spouts, hurricanes or typhoons, like how often are those things seen in Hawaii? Did you guys see them while you were living there?
There's a hurricane season from June through November, and it's very similar to the volcanic activity. You get warnings on, okay, there's one approaching, so you might want to start stocking up. And then as it gets closer and they start seeing a pattern of that it might be coming even closer, then they'll start telling people, okay, now you need to go put car in your gas, you need to go secure everything in your house. And they kind of give you a time frame. Um, of
So you do have ample warning. It's not like it's spontaneous.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And
So,
I think in 6 years, we probably only had like maybe 4 that
and
were of any
this,
concern.
yeah, they mostly just brought a lot of rain on Oahu, but the other island, Big Island, always gets hit hard. And then I think it's dumps a lot of the rain and over Big Island, and then by the time it gets to us, it's the wind has died down,
Okay.
and then it's still just rainy. So
Hmm, okay. By the way, I was going to ask you, in terms of geography, why is it that they suggest that Kona is, or not, I'm sorry, that the Big Island is separated into the Kona side and the Hilo side? Is it just is I mean, are those like the two biggest cities on the island? Are they, or is there
so
a actual geographical barrier that separates the two halves of the island?
yeah, it's in all of the islands. I would say there's a weather pattern like on Oahu. There's the windward side and the leeward side. The windward side gets the wind coming in with the rain clouds, and as the wind comes in, it dumps a bunch of rain, and that side of the island is green and lush and really humid. And then by the time the wind blows to the other side and even the clouds get to the other side, they've dumped a lot of the rain, and it's the dry side.
Mm,
So it's interesting. Just on one island, if you drive around the island, one side could be brown and dry and kind of look like. I mean, we've been driving and said this looks like Southern California, and then you drive a half hour, 40 minutes to the other side, and it's lush and green, and there's waterfalls and everything. And so it's the same thing on Big Island. The Hilo side is the green, lush side,
The rainy
and
side.
it's the rainy side, and it's also the windier side. And the Kona side is drier, it also has more volcanic rock.
Mm.
It's harder to grow things.
Well, although the
So-
volcanic soil, I would think would make it more, and that's probably why they have like coffee. That's a big staple over at least on that part of the island, I would think.
Well, it's the coffee is actually most of it's grown on the
Hilo.
windward side,
Hilo
is
on
it?
the Hilo side,
Huh,
Yeah.
why do they call
because
why
it
do they
needs
call
the
Hilo?
rain.
I wonder why they don't call
You know
it Hilo coffee instead they call it Kona coffee.
I know, right?
I don't know.
That's a good question.
Yeah, we've got
Marketing.
a friend.
It's marketing, darn it.
Exactly.
You were saying
But
you have a
it's
friend?
more pronounced with the temperature and climate difference from one side of the island to the other. It's more pronounced on the islands that have a really tall mountain range or volcanoes
Right.
because it forces those rain clouds up to
Yeah.
dump all the rain.
And the Kona
And then
side
it
of
comes
the
down the mountain then.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
Kona side of the island is drier, and so I think a lot of tourists. Well, I mean, when you go to Hawaii, you expect it to be blue skies and sun every day, and so a lot of them will want to go to those sides of the island. I like the rain, so I like going to the Hilo side, but there's not as many tourists over there too, but it has waterfalls and other things. So
There's a lot of lush and beautiful spots to it. So
Yeah.
that's really nice.
Yeah.
Let's move on to talk about culture, because culture in Hawaii is distinctively unique, it seems, compared to other cultural experiences that we've talked about. Now, I did a previous video with you guys on Guam, and there are very various distinctive differences between the culture of Hawaii and the culture of Guam. From a first-hand person's perspective, having lived there, can you tell me a little bit about some of those differences?
Well, Hawaii has a lot more influence from the mainland USA, I
Okay.
would say. Guam has a strong Spanish influence. So a lot of the buildings, the architecture, and the religious beliefs are more Catholic influenced from the Catholic Spanish missionaries, I would
Mhm.
say. And the holidays, I think, more influenced by the Spanish Catholicism.
Although now in Hawaii, it seems like there's an emerging Mormon population, correct?
There is, yes.
Yeah.
There has been for a while, but not. I found that when I was looking up the religious dynamics, because you see everything there.
Mhm.
I mean, but in Guam, there are a lot more. Was it like over 80%?
75%.
75? Okay.
Yeah.
In Hawaii, less than 30% identifies as Christian.
Okay.
10% Buddhist, and that's there are several Buddhist temples
Mhm.
around the island,
Student.
and that's definitely, if you're going to be on Oahu for more than a couple of days visiting the Buddhist temples, you can even as a tourist go and just walk around the Buddhist temples, and they're really fascinating. The architecture is really beautiful, the landscaping, just the quiet areas and meditation rooms, they're really elaborate, really beautiful. There's a Korean one. There's several actually throughout Honolulu. The biggest one is Valley of the Temples, which is in Kaneohe, and they actually have tour buses that go there. You can get a tour of it. But that's 10% of the population, 8% Judaism, and then 10% are other, and that's everything from traditional Hawaiian. And there are people that practice the traditional Hawaiian. They learn the stories and some of the ceremonies and medicines and everything that goes along with that.
Wow, that sounds really awesome.
Yeah.
And we were talking about something earlier where different colored shirts. This is apart from religion. Now we're talking about the culture. Sometimes different colored shirts may have different representation. And one of the things that I learned on a tour I had gone through, and again, this is from a tour guide, kids, so don't validate this as gospel, but it was that certain colored shirts represent certain islands, and so they have that influence.
So each island has a representative flower.
Okay.
Like the Big Island is lehua flower, which is red.
Okay.
Um,
That would explain the red shirt. Okay, that makes
right.
sense.
But I'm not going to list all of them, but yeah, each one has a different colored flower, and then the color is supposed to be symbolic for that particular island.
Okay, that's cool. That makes more sense then.
And you'll see that in parades or just different contests. If there's whatever athletes or beauty pageants or anything where the people come from those islands, they might wear clothes representing that, or leis or flower decorations. So.
Very cool. Now, in terms of art, there's always, of course, local arts. There's carvings, craft work.
Right.
But this guy up here, right over here, talk to me about this guy. Do you know anything about him?
That's brother is his nickname. Hawaiian people are very proud of him. And you could buy any of his CDs, just pick a random one, and it's such a treat to listen to, because he sings in English, but he also sings in Hawaiian.
Okay.
It's such a beautiful language. He sings about nature and the rainbows, or he makes a lot of references in his music to the Hawaiian people and the culture and just the beauty of the islands.
Fantastic. On the topic of art as well, dancing is a huge part of that, and that's where, of course, hula comes in.
Right.
So,
and hula is everybody knows hula is Hawaiian, but they might not know. They know the style. When you see it, you're seeing hula. But if you learn a hula dance, you're actually learning the story that goes along with a song. So if you ever take a hula lesson or something, you'll learn the lyrics of the song and then the movements that go along with the words of the song.
Okay.
So it's almost like a body sign language, I guess.
No, that's actually a really good way of putting it. I like that, actually.
Yeah.
And then
I'm sorry, go ahead. Can be, from what I've seen, some of the dancing can be very sacred and make references to certain sacred people or moments. But some of them are just fun and playful and tell stories. And so that's why, that's what's so neat to me about hula is it's not just sacred, and it's not just fun, and it's not just a show. It's everything. And sometimes they'll pull people from the audience to come up and join in the dancing. And then sometimes it's very, just like music, I guess, just like singing, a little bit of everything.
Well, and funny that you mentioned that, because it seems like a very inviting culture.
Yes.
They seem like, you may mention to me before we started recording about, like a lei making thing that they sometimes do once per year or the like. Can you tell me a little bit about that too?
Yes, they have a holiday. They sort of adapted it from May Day, like the stateside May Day, but they call it Lei Day.
Okay.
And it starts on May 1st, but it goes through the whole month. They usually will try within the first 2 weeks, but there's so many people around the island celebrating. They like to scatter the different festivals and everything, so you can go to all of them. But you'll see, from what I saw, I was substitute teaching, and I got to be in several different schools that were practicing for this. So it was really neat to see, because every single school that I worked in prepared for the May Day festivals. And they had kids all the way from kindergarten, even through high school, preparing for this. And they would learn songs and chants and drumming and different instruments, gourds. And like with the really little kids, they might just sing a song and do a couple dances or something. And then
Aw.
by the time they get to like 4th, 5th grade, they have everybody, boys and girls doing hula. Some people not who've never been to Hawaii might think hula is like a women's dance, but it's not. Boys dance hula also.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then they would do a performance for the public. And I would say one of the best Hawaiian dance performances I've seen, even having gone to several luau's in the Polynesian Cultural Center, was a high school performance for May Day. And it was just amazing because the high school kids did the choreographing for it, the costumes. They taught each other the different moves. They had different they had Samoan kids doing dances and some kids from Tahiti and Fiji, like different representing from the different islands, also Guam, different parts of Micronesia. And it was about an hour and a half, 2-hour show.
Nice.
Just totally performed by high school kids. It was amazing. It was the best $5. They only charged $5, and after I thought this is the best $5. But they took so much pride in their music and their dance and their chants and their culture, which I just love about Hawaii. So,
Do you know if the ukulele is actually a native instrument of Hawaii? Like, did someone actually create that there, or is it something that just happens to follow along with a lot of the music that is?
That's a good
I don't know.
question.
I'll have to research that one.
Yeah.
I think that there were other instruments like from Japan that were stringed instruments that came, but I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
I'll have to look into that. On moving a little bit on to the topic of culture, let's talk about language, because while I had maybe mentioned to you guys before, I knew obviously the words aloha and I've known the word mahalo. You brought up another one that I totally forgot about, which is luau. And so luau, is that just in terms like a feast, or is there another rationale behind the word?
Anymore, a luau is very commercialized. Like if when you as a tourist buy a ticket to a luau, you're seeing parts of what they used to include in their traditional luau's. Like there's always a lot of food.
Usually a
There's
pig
dancing.
roast.
Yeah, pig roast.
But it's underground though, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think is it a ula? I'm not sure the name of it, but they basically dig a big hole in the ground and then line it with banana leaves, and then put coals in there and the pig and wrap it up in banana leaves and cover it over with earth and let it cook for however many hours, and then uncover it and serve the pig.
Yeah, and I think it, like what we see the tourists doing, they did before, like especially if they had visitors from other islands or explorers coming through that they were befriended, they would do some sort of big feast that was welcoming. And so that's sort of what we're seeing now. I don't see a lot of local people going to, I mean, they perform at them and everything, but they have their own family celebrations and everything that would be like a smaller scale.
That makes sense.
Than that, like a big feast and everything. Everything.
I was gonna say, any other words that I should be aware of, or that my students would want to know if they were heading to Hawaii? I mean, obviously, lei is the flower necklace.
Right.
I don't think anything that's gonna make your life any easier. Okay. English is widely spoken there.
Yeah, and it can be hard to know the pronunciations of just the roads and the highways, and it's tough. And they know that it's tough, and they know, like
they're accommodating.
There's like licky highway, like Like. You always will hear a new person say like highway. It's like, no.
Yeah. One thing is anything that has a W in it is pronounced as a B.
Yeah.
So like Eva Beach,
Oh, got it.
and Victor.
Got it.
So when you go to like Eva Beach, which is EWA, it's pronounced Eva.
Right.
Oh, is that why it's sometimes I'll hear I'll hear the word Hawaii pronounced Hawaii, and that may be why that's
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, Siri has a really difficult time over there.
They do. And then Google Maps, there's even a funny YouTube video where the Hawaiian is trying to get directions to somewhere and he's saying it. And is it Siri or Google Maps?
Siri.
It's Siri keeps thinking that it's saying something totally different and it takes him down this really funny path because the pronunciation is just not.
We Americans.
So in Hawaii, actually, English and Hawaiian are official languages there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the unofficial language is Pidgin,
Yes.
which a mix of, so back in the early 1900s through modern, when they were bringing in workers to work on the sugarcane plantations, pineapple farmers, they'd bring in people from Portugal, from Japan, China, all these different places that all had different languages.
Mm-hmm.
So they've kind of evolved this Pidgin, which is a mix of English and different words from different languages. And it's really entertaining to listen to. And sometimes it's really difficult to understand.
It's almost like
speaking English.
It's almost like a Hawaiian Cajun in a way.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or Creole.
And if you want to be, if you like stories and you want to be entertained, just go on YouTube and look up Hawaiian Pidgin and then say a fairy tale like Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
And there'll be somebody that tells the story in Pidgin so you can understand it if you already know. But it's really fun to listen to and listen to that dialect and the different words for different things. It's really neat.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of culture, I could not leave this slide unless I had talked about food, because I am a huge foodie, as we've always known. But I sometimes think that my interpretation of Hawaiian foods might be off because they're very Americanized. I want to get your guys' unvarnished views. I put a picture on here, and I don't know if this is even remotely accurate. Talk to me a little bit about typical foods that you'll see over there that are a little bit more traditional.
That's pretty accurate, actually.
Okay.
Barbecue is huge in Hawaii. Whether it's short ribs or chicken or pork, whatever. Made a lot of rice, a lot of Spam. Just like Guam. You go to the McDonald's and Spam's on the menu. They do eat a lot of poi.
And poi is a paste, is that correct?
It's mashed up taro.
It's fermented.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It is fermented. And it can be used as either like a main meal or as like almost like an appetizer that you dip your bread in or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And taro root is like a purplish colored root, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
That's on your slide there. It's the purple one there, just above the green stuff. That one right there.
Okay, got it.
A lot of taro. And then one of our favorite things about Hawaii is the poke.
Oh, that would be like almost a sashimi, kind of like a fishbowl type thing.
Right. It's basically raw fish that's mixed up with like sesame seed oil and different spices and things like that. And you can get it in any kind of fish you can think of, octopus, crab, everything. And there's places to get poke at every grocery store, every convenience store.
Yeah. And
so good.
One thing I noticed just in the Pacific Islands, I mean, in Guam as well as Hawaii, is they never just take meat and put it on the grill. I mean, Americans take hamburgers and hot dogs and steaks and just put it on the grill.
Yeah.
That would be just so offensive. I think in the Pacific Island culture, they really put a lot of preparation into the marinades and the seasoning and with everything. So the meat, any meat that you eat at a barbecue is just really flavorful.
Nice. Well, it seems like we have a good spread there.
Mhm.
Enough to give you enough energy to go out and do some sports, which I know
Oh
there's
yeah,
not a lot of professional teams out there, but there is definitely surfing.
definitely surfing. I mean, that's like pre-Hawaii. I think when the people initially came to Hawaii, they brought the surfing culture with them, from Polynesian, um, as well as they came by canoe. So just the sailing and the boating, was part of that, and canoe surfing too is really popular. But there aren't any professional baseball teams or football teams, but there are professional surfers, through history. The biggest one, in history that they take a lot of pride in is, Duke
Duke.
Kahanamoko.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see a statue of him in Waikiki. And
They even have a restaurant for him out here.
yes, they do. But he was, I mean, the local people knew him as a surfer, but he was a really strong swimmer and made it into the Olympics.
Hmm.
And so that's where he became really famous, as a swimmer initially. But then after the Olympics, he went on tour through different places in the United States along the coasts, demonstrating surfing, and then and also his swimming stroke. But he helped. I think his name really helped with the revival of surfing, because when the missionaries went there, um, surfing was used to make bets,
Hmm.
which they didn't approve of, and there would be contests and everything. And so for a while, it was squashed, in the Hawaiian culture. It was, outlawed, basically.
Missionaries got rid of all the fun stuff.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know gambling is not legal in the state of Hawaii, so there's
Right.
that too.
Yes. And before, it used to be used as a way, like if there were disputes, if there are land disputes,
Mhm.
we might go to court. They'd have a surfing contest.
Okay.
And so it was really important that people knew how to surf well, because that could determine, their future of
That explains that
landowner.
Brady Bunch episode that I saw several years ago. Sorry,
Yeah.
off topic there.
Yeah.
Question for you though. Now we talk about canoeing
Uh-huh.
and we talk about paddleboarding. What is outrigging exactly?
So outrigger, there are different sizes of canoes, and I mean, you could picture a canoe just by itself, like, just
Just
almost like a
the
kayak
single hull.
hull. Well, the outrigger has, on one side, it'll have beams going out with another, like a mini balance canoe.
Like a float.
Yeah, like a float that, keeps it balanced from flipping over.
Hmm.
And so there's one man canoes, 2, 3, 4 man canoes, 6 man canoes. There's even, originally there were canoes that came over that probably fit 20 people.
Yeah, the
or
double hull
more.
canoes. Double hull, where they'd have two canoes next to each other with like beams or trampoline in between.
To stabilize.
connect them to
Yeah,
stabilize.
Almost like a catamaran.
Correct.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
was gonna ask. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt. I apologize. Go ahead.
that sport is huge out there,
For the 6-man outrigger canoes.
for the racing.
Yeah.
It's just, it takes up people's whole summer.
It can be kind of a cult.
Like you get wrapped up into it. I mean, I did some competitions, and at the beginning of the season in spring, they'll have shorter races. And then as the season progresses, they'll go into long distance season, and that's when they'll actually race from island to island.
Got it.
And then the final biggest race, which is sort of the Mount Everest, I guess, of Hawaiian canoe paddling is from Molokai Island to Oahu.
Which I'm going to brag on Amy here for a second, because she actually did that.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't a race, but it was a crossing from Molokai to Oahu, which was about 35 miles.
Yeah, I
Oh
think
my
by the
gosh.
coast it was like 40 miles, but it's, yeah, and it's people really, it becomes like a whole family activity. The kids will be in a club, the parents will be in the same club. There's competitions between high school, I would say, within the schools. I mean, there is the other sports, soccer, baseball, everything, but the outrigger canoeing between the high schools becomes a really big deal.
Very cool. Let's talk about the population, actually, of the area. Because when I'm looking at this map, there's only one island that's really showing a huge population, and that appears to be Oahu.
Correct.
Size-wise,
Yes.
how big is the population of the island series?
So there's about 1.4 million people throughout Hawaii, and just under 1 million of those live in Oahu. And so the most populated part of Oahu is the southern part, which is like Honolulu, in that area. And that area is a little bit more urban.
Okay.
And as you get further away from kind of those cities and stuff, then it gets a little more rural.
Okay. And then in terms of the economy for the islands, you have a variety of different organizations, starting with, of course, the state of Hawaii being one of the biggest employers there. University of Hawaii, University of Hawaii is another one. Hawaii Pacific Health, a big employer there. Hawaiian Airlines, another one that's a huge employer there. HEI, which is the electrical grid throughout the islands. That's another one that's a huge employer. The city and county of Honolulu, which I did not think of until, Bob, you had mentioned it, in terms of, well, if you think of it as like Oahu almost being like Manhattan, then it makes more sense to say, okay, then obviously the city and county of Honolulu has a huge employer within that area. That makes perfect sense. St. Francis Hospital, another big one that's in the area there. And then, of course, Honolulu International Airport. The ones I keep thinking about, and we talked a little bit about this, Hilo Hattie's, while I would think it would be a big company, is actually, I guess, not so big of a company in Hawaii. They just let themselves be known in other geographical locations. And then another one that on the mainland we don't hear that much about, but is super, super, super huge in Hawaii, and I guess a little in Guam too, is the ABC shops. And what are those, just for the viewers who have not been there before?
It's basically like a 7-Eleven.
But they also sell touristy things.
Yeah.
If you need a t-shirt or a baseball cap that says Hawaii, or a magnet, that's a place to go. Or if you're staying there, then
at the hotel and you need milk and toothpaste, you can get that all at the ABC store.
Everything.
And
there are multiple ABC stores on a street typically.
There are. Yeah. And they'll be known for different things, because I've known people that said, oh, I really like that headband or something. Where did you get it? And that it'll only be sold at a specific ABC store, not all of them. And some of them are also known for their bakeries, which is, to me, that's surprising. But I like that, because you don't think of like a 7-Eleven. But actually, 7-Eleven does have
7-Eleven has
really good food in Hawaii.
That doesn't surprise me, though.
Yeah, but there'll be certain ABC stores in Waikiki that'll have really good coffee and baked goods and sandwiches, but the one a block away doesn't. It'll have the magnets and the hats.
So there's specialized locations. Well, that sounds really, really great. Let's skip then over to the transportation corridor, because from what I've heard, traffic is as much a problem in Hawaii as it is here in Los Angeles. Talk to me about that.
Well, specifically in Honolulu, the traffic can be really terrible. I've heard it compared to Los Angeles traffic in terms of like how congested it can be. But I think one of the main problems on Oahu is that if you're driving, if you work in Honolulu and you have to get up to North Shore or have a beach or somewhere, there's only one main way that you can go. There's only one main highway. So if there's an accident or it's backed up, you can't reroute a different way. So it's just really terrible. The view might be really beautiful while you're stuck in traffic, but it's still traffic. So
Do employers within that area typically allow leeway for that traffic?
I've seen some. I mean, I didn't even know like people in the military that'll go early and then leave early.
I've had a lot of coworkers that would have to come into work at 4 a.m. to avoid the traffic and then sleep at work for a couple hours.
Oh, man.
But there's a lot of employers that will subsidize with buying you bus passes. They have a really good bus system there.
Okay, that's cool.
And even if you're there on vacation, the bus system is a great way to get around because it goes to everywhere on the island. It's really cheap and it's really easy they've got a good app and it's real easy to figure out.
Okay. Now, in terms of the transportation corridors, obviously they have a sizable airport on Honolulu. Is there any other major airports, like the Big Island maybe has an airport?
Big Island's got a big one. Maui does.
Big Island has two.
Yeah.
Hilo and Kona.
Okay.
Maui has a big one in Kahului.
Okay.
There's one in Kauai. And there's kind of a smaller one in Lanai, but Lanai is kind of a private, almost a private island.
You might not fly into there initially, fly to one of the other islands. So. And then they're building the train. Yeah,
they're building a rail system on Oahu to connect east and west.
Okay.
But there's also major seaports in all the islands too. So a lot of them get visited by cruise ships.
And speaking of which, I mean, obviously the tourism industry is huge in Hawaii.
It is.
That's definitely the biggest industry, I would say.
Yeah, the numbers from 2019, Hawaii did 10.3 million tourists.
Which equates to about how much in dollars? Did they say on it?
$17 billion.
Good Lord. That's an insanely high amount of money for an area. But I mean, keep in mind, like if Disneyland was its own chain of islands, there you go. It's because, and again, we saw some of the pictures at the very beginning. There's so much beauty, natural beauty, but the people are very, very warm and receptive. The food is fantastic. There's so many different reasons to want to visit the state.
I mean, if you love nature, there's things you'll love about Hawaii. If you like hiking, beach combing, exploring, but also the history is amazing. So the history buffs love it.
But you know what? I've been there twice, and I myself am more of a city slicker. I think I've told you that before. And still hanging out in Honolulu was fantastic. There was like everywhere there was buildings, hotels, great places, but like I was talking to you guys before the recording, there's a certain sense of harmony that goes in with this as well, because it seems like nature and the buildings are kind of interwoven. Like if you have a building there, you're going to have like trees inside the building, or you're going to have something like a courtyard or something like that. It's just so intermingled. It's breathtaking.
It's almost like you're in the city in a botanical garden.
Yeah.
Really, there's just really beautiful bushes, and there'll be trees and plumeria trees, and it's really fragrant.
That's one thing I do remember very much of the last couple times I was there. The smells of the area were just lovely. You can smell the flowers everywhere. It's just so lovely. Now, it is a primarily Democratic state. It's a blue state for the most part, both federally as well as statewide. Would you suggest that's correct?
Yeah. I would say that for right now, yes.
Okay. And then in terms of the resources, natural resources, there's a lot of different crops that are available to people there. Sugarcane being one of the largest ones that had been there at one time. I don't know if it's so much anymore because I know that they've moved some things off the island. But pineapple was a big one. Coffee still is a very large one.
definitely.
And then macadamia
Coffee,
nuts.
pineapple are the most well-known. Macadamia.
Yeah, they stopped sugarcane production back in like the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
But it was one of
yeah,
the biggest sugarcane producers for a very, very, very long time.
it
Right.
was. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it
There
seems
was
like
a lot of
shifting over to coffee now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Coffee is definitely one of the big crops there. When you go over to the Hilo side of Big Island, there's a lot of coffee plantations up in the wetter areas there.
Yeah.
And
And if you go to Oahu, you can go to the Dole plantation
Mhm.
and you can just walk around there and they'll have, pineapple food and the pineapple ice cream. But you can also get a tour and take the little train around where they'll give you a background about the Dole plantation and the history of pineapple growing, which it is interesting, the history. So
And it is one of the few places I have gone where at the airport you can actually pick up your own little pineapple in its own little cage to bring
yeah,
with you.
yeah.
And I think you had like special machines that would peel the entire pineapple for you. Like
Oh yeah,
it's so fun.
yeah.
Now, in terms of education on the islands, three big universities that came to mind: University of Hawaii, Brigham Young, surprisingly had its own establishment, a very, very large establishment there.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Laia is where it's located, I think.
Laia.
Laia,
Yeah.
okay.
Right. That's on Oahu. And it's that whole area, that whole part of the island, a lot of the businesses are run by people who live near the university and also they run what is the name of it?
The Polynesian
Cultural
Cultural
Center.
Center.
Culture
Yeah.
Center. I haven't been there in a few years, but it's a definitely if you're in Hawaii or Oahu for several days, it's worth going to, but you need the whole day to go.
Mhm.
And it kind of reminded me of like the Epcot Center where you go to different countries,
Yeah.
but you go to different island nations. And it's really interesting because the people who work there go to BYU and they're students who are working at the Polynesian Cultural Center. And sometimes they will be placed in jobs that will go along with whatever their major is.
Oh,
So if they're
cool.
majoring in teaching, then they'll have jobs teaching crafts or music or something like that.
That sounds fun, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think BYU also has a hospitality major, so they might be, majoring in something else. And then also the people, and they'll actually get people from the different island nations, from Fiji, Tahiti, Samoa, different places to come and represent their island nation while they're working at the cultural center, and then also going to school and getting scholarships there. So
And
that's
then
really
And then another college I know that's really big there as well, the Hawaii Pacific University. I think they have a nursing program and a psychology program.
yeah, they're well known for their nursing program, and then I think psychology. But I've known quite a few nurses that went there and got their doctorate. Actually,
Do you guys happen to know what the literacy rate is in Hawaii? I would imagine it's probably fairly high.
it varies from island to island, anywhere from 91 to 95%.
Okay, that makes
From what
sense.
so
Awesome. And then, of course, safety and security versus major crimes, foreign and domestic terrorism. Uh, Obviously, like one of the biggest terrorist activities in history, which led to war, was the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Imperial military at the time. Obviously, since then, we're on extremely good terms with Japan. They're one of our strongest allies.
Mhm.
But in terms of crimes, Bob, you were saying that there's organized crime that's a problem there too, correct?
Yeah, it's not really one that you see as a visitor. You don't really see very much of, but with there being a lot of Asian influence from Japan, Korea, China, with that and the fact that there's tourists, a lot of tourists there. There's things like people trafficking, drug trafficking, gambling, things like that. But a lot of that you'll never see as just a tourist walking the streets.
In fact, you were saying, as history would have it, the meth production started in Hawaii and worked its way into the mainland, correct?
Well, the meth problem started here. It was imported from Asia, started in Hawaii, and then from here it actually spread out to the mainland U.S. And it still continues to be a big problem in Hawaii.
But in terms of domestic terrorism, anything that comes up that's of any note that you've ever heard of?
Not really. There's some smaller scale protests and stuff like that. Like when they wanted to put a new observatory up on Mauna Kea. I wouldn't call that terrorism though at all, but just more like local protests,
like civil discord or something like that. Nothing really, no violent protests or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay.
And every once in a while you hear, in Waikiki of people getting robbed, but it's nothing.
Just crime stuff.
Yeah, nothing really big.
Okay. Well, when we think about Hawaii, if we're going to do this 1-minute speech about like why to visit, we've already gone over a billion things. Two things we didn't mention that I really wanted to talk a little bit more about, and I think we cover this. If I am correct, and if I'm not, I really apologize to my students who heard this already. The observatory located on the island of Hawaii, at the top of there, one of the world's most renowned observatories because of the amazing night sky that you have up in that area. And then I believe Disney has now created a presence on one of the islands as well. I don't know that much about it as well, but I think it's like a resort community that they've
set up. It's a hotel.
Okay.
And it's
over in Ko'olina, which is on the southwest side of Oahu.
Okay.
And it's sort of a staycation. I mean, even I know people in Hawaii that'll go there for the weekend, and you can book, your breakfast with a princess or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a themed hotel.
Yeah.
So it is kind of Americanized the whole way through. It's not really, I was thinking it was more of a Hawaiian experience that Disney just happened to kind of own a little bit of, or
it's Hawaiian themed, but they still bring all the Disney stuff there.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So let's do the 1-minute elevator speech about why someone wants to come and visit Hawaii. Talk to me about it. If you were talking to a person that they said, I was thinking about visiting Hawaii, but I'm not so sure. Why would a person want to go to Hawaii?
First of all, it is beautiful everywhere. Any island you want to go to, if you just take a drive, it will be beautiful. Then if you're into nature, it has some great hiking. Just swimming, the water is really beautiful.
Food is great.
The food is great. If you're into sports, I mean, there's everything, especially the water sports, it's scuba diving, surfing, outrigger canoeing.
The weather's great.
The weather's great. Yeah, it averages
always
82, 84 degrees all year.
But even for a city slicker like me, it seems like the shopping's really awesome. They've got amazing, like you were making mention, Bob, the food is fantastic. So I'm a foodie. I like that kind of stuff too.
And the food is very eclectic, which I like. I think with the Asian influence, there's some great Thai food, Japanese food, Korean food.
Just a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, yeah.
And there's a lot of, for history buffs, there's a lot of really good historical museums, both early Hawaiian history, World War II history.
Right.
It's got a little bit of everything for anybody.
And even the art. I mean, we didn't talk a lot about the art, but especially in Honolulu, there are areas, there's that whole district that is the art district where they, in Honolulu, they paint on the walls murals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really neat. And you can walk from street to street. I mean, you could spend a couple of hours just walking around, looking at these amazing murals of either different stories from Hawaii or just different images of flowers or volcanoes or surfers or anything. That's really interesting.
It
And
sounds so
with
fun.
that it's really neat to see.
Yeah.
And then even with history, whether you're into ancient history or more modern World War II history, there's things to see and historical sites to visit. So
I've been there twice. My husband has not been there at all yet. I'm trying to take him this year, but of course, COVID has been keeping us
yeah.
under wraps. So we will have to see how that goes for next year, but I'm really encouraged. So cross your fingers for me.
All right.
But Amy and Bob, I got to tell you guys, it's awesome always having you on. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Scott.
Oh, I really appreciate it. And now for my students that are out there, if you have any questions or comments, anything that you want to know about, you can certainly let me know by sending me an email at scott@theprofessortravel.com. If you're on YouTube right now and you'd like to be notified when new videos go up, hit that bell icon right above us and we'll be more than happy to, the algorithm will let you know then. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It definitely helps the channel. If you like this video and you really appreciate and want to know more about this content, hit the like button. We'll continue to focus on that. If you're on the podcast, however, please feel free to give us a rating. We really do appreciate it. Until our next time, my name is Scott. I am the Professor of Travel, and make every day a travel adventure. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.